Miguel Valenzuela waited in the shadows, watching Agent Matthew Reyes like a hunter stalking prey. With every move Reyes made, Miguel was already 10 steps ahead, silent, calculating, and driven by a rage that had been building for years. When the ambush finally came, it wasn't just an attack, it was a message. And by the time the smoke cleared, one thing was certain. This wasn't the work of a lone man seeking revenge. It was the first strike in a chilling campaign. And behind it all stood a ghost from the past, Elias Montoya, a former federal agent who knew exactly how to bring the system to its knees. It began as a quiet, warm morning in Laredo, Texas. The sun rose over the flat horizon, casting golden light over the dry brush and winding roads. Border Patrol and ICE agents were already on their morning routines, monitoring checkpoints and scanning through surveillance feeds. Nothing seemed unusual until 7:13 a.m., when a call came through dispatch that would change everything. An ICE agent had been shot in broad daylight outside a roadside diner off Route 359. The dispatcher's voice trembled slightly as the details came. 2 shots fired, the suspect fled the scene in a dark Ford Ranger with no license plates, and the agent was found barely conscious on the pavement. Almost immediately, a blue alert was issued, sending waves of urgency across the state. Law enforcement across Texas was notified. The alert system was rarely used. It's triggered only in the most serious cases, when a law enforcement officer had been seriously injured or killed, and the suspect was on the run. This wasn't a random crime. It was deliberate, dangerous, and targeted. Agent Matthew Reyes, the victim of the attack, had just picked up his usual breakfast order when the shooting occurred. Surveillance footage from the diner's security cameras captured the moment. A man had waited behind a parked delivery truck, then stepped out with a pistol in his hand, aimed at Reyes, and fired without hesitation. Reyes dropped instantly. The suspect then ran toward the Ford Ranger, started the engine, and disappeared down a narrow road leading out into the desert. Despite a rapid response from local law enforcement and federal agents, there were no tire tracks, no fingerprints, and no trace of the attacker. By mid-morning, helicopters circled overhead. Border agents searched every trail and arroyo. Roadblocks were thrown up at every exit from the area, but the suspects seemed to have vanished. What shocked investigators was the level of precision. It wasn't a panicked shooting. The attacker had waited, hidden, timed the ambush perfectly, and escaped cleanly. It sent a chill through every agent on the ground. Whoever did this knew how law enforcement operated and how to avoid them. The diner's patrons, still shaken, provided fragmented descriptions. A man in a hooded jacket, face partially covered, tall and lean, moving with purpose. No one recognized him, and there were no vehicles reported stolen that matched the Ford Ranger's description. Everything about the attack felt premeditated. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was an operation. While Agent Reyes was rushed into emergency surgery, federal task forces began combing through every detail of his recent assignments. They needed to know why he was targeted. What case could have provoked such a bold assault in broad daylight? The truth would soon surface, and it would uncover more than anyone had imagined. The investigation into the shooting of Agent Matthew Reyes intensified, as agents from multiple federal departments assembled in Laredo. Every piece of Reyes' professional history was placed under scrutiny, and a team of analysts began dissecting his caseload from the past 6 months. One file stood out almost immediately: a recent raid that led to the arrest of Hector Valenzuela, a mid-level trafficker suspected of smuggling narcotics and undocumented migrants across the border. The operation, though successful, had one major loose end. Hector's older brother, Miguel Valenzuela, had escaped capture during the raid. The escape wasn't a chaotic one. It had been controlled, strategic, and untraceable, and now it seemed more than just a coincidence. Miguel was no stranger to law enforcement. His name had appeared in reports for years, always as a background player, a lookout, a transporter, a fixer. But the deeper the task force dug, the more it became apparent that Miguel's role had evolved. There were whispers and intel reports suggesting cartel connections, possibly a leadership position within a local trafficking network. Yet nothing solid had ever been pinned on him. Until now, he had stayed in the shadows, avoiding confrontation. That made the ambush on Reyes all the more shocking. A troubling pattern emerged as agents reviewed similar cases. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, 3 ICE agents working cases linked to Valenzuela's network had reported strange incidents, being followed after work. Noticing unfamiliar vehicles parked near their homes, and even anonymous threats that were dismissed as routine risks. None of the incidents were formally connected at the time, but viewed in hindsight, they formed a chilling timeline. Reyes hadn't been chosen at random. He had been watched, studied, and selected. The team began reconstructing Miguel's movements using any digital breadcrumbs available. Social media profiles of known associates, traffic cameras, fuel station purchases, all were scanned for clues. What they found was unsettling. Miguel had been seen in several locations tied to ICE operations in the weeks before the attack. Each visit was short, methodical, and always just out of reach of surveillance. It became clear he had been planning something. More concerning was the suggestion that Miguel wasn't acting alone. Communications data showed contact with burner phones and encrypted messaging apps linked to a dormant network that had gone quiet. 2 years earlier, the timing coincided with the disappearance of a former customs officer, Elias Montoya, who had vanished after being accused of leaking classified intel to traffickers. Montoya had never been found, presumed dead or in hiding. But now, old intelligence files were reopened, and his name returned to the surface of the investigation. As the pieces slowly connected, the task force began to understand the true nature of the threat. This was not a singular act of revenge by a grieving brother. It was something bigger, a coordinated plan, possibly led by someone with insider knowledge. Aiming to strike at the core of ICE operations, the shooting of Agent Reyes was not the end goal. It was only the beginning. A week after the ambush, a rancher tending to his livestock stumbled across a strange sight deep within his property, near the Rio Grande. Hidden beneath a cluster of mesquite trees was a makeshift camp. It's barely visible from the air, and almost invisible from the main road. Fresh tire tracks led to a shallow trench where a dark Ford Ranger was partially buried under camouflage netting and covered in dust. The license plate was missing, and the vehicle matched the description given in the blue alert. When agents arrived on the scene, they approached with caution, unsure if the suspect was still nearby. What they discovered inside the vehicle shifted the case into a far more serious and dangerous direction. Under the driver's seat was a duffel bag packed with food, water, ammunition, and several loaded magazines. Tucked in the glove box was a small flash drive and a notebook filled with names, dates, and strange markings. On closer inspection, agents identified the names of multiple ICE officers, their service numbers, and handwritten observations detailing their habits when they arrived at work, which routes they drove, where they stopped for lunch, and even the times their families left home in the mornings. It was a detailed log of surveillance. Agent Matthew Reyes had been one of many entries. The flash drive revealed something even more chilling: drone footage. The angles were aerial, zooming in on border checkpoints and ICE vehicles. There were timestamps and location markers, suggesting someone had been flying a drone undetected across the southern Texas border for weeks. The footage focused on movement patterns, moments when guards were distracted, when shifts changed, and when gates were momentarily left open. Whoever was behind the operation had invested time, patience, and an unsettling level of technical skill. Inside a nearby wash bucket, agents found a burn pile, melted cell phones, plastic ID cards, and the charred remains of what looked like a law enforcement jacket. Fingerprints were impossible to recover, but the burn site indicated the suspect was trying to erase his identity, cover his tracks, and perhaps fake his own disappearance. A faint blood stain on the Ranger's back seat led investigators to believe he may have been injured during or after the ambush, possibly while fleeing the scene. The camp itself was no ordinary hideout. It had been arranged with precision, using natural cover, elevation for lookout points, and silent solar-powered equipment to charge devices. Whoever set it up wasn't just hiding, they were preparing. This wasn't a man on the run making desperate choices. It was someone who knew the land, knew the law enforcement response system, and knew how to stay invisible. With Reyes still in recovery and unable to provide any additional insight, the agents could only rely on what was left behind. The trail was cold, but the threat was clearly heating up. Miguel Valenzuela was still at large, but the evidence suggested he might not be working alone. And if the notebook's entries were any indication, the ambush on Agent Reyes was just one move in a much larger calculated strategy. 2 weeks after the discovery of the hidden camp, another lead surfaced, this time from an unexpected place, a cemetery on the outskirts of Nuevo Laredo. A maintenance worker, while making rounds, reported movement near an old, crumbling mausoleum that hadn't been visited in years. Inside, he found scattered food wrappers, medical gauze stained with dried blood, and a cot fashioned from old church pews. The temperature had dropped sharply at night, yet someone had managed to survive there, living quietly among the dead. When investigators swept the site, they confirmed what the worker had stumbled upon: a temporary hideout used recently and possibly still active. Buried in the corner of the mausoleum was a plastic container holding more than just survival supplies. It contained photographs of ICE agents, similar to those found in the abandoned Ford Ranger. One of the pictures showed Agent Reyes, taken from a distance while he stood in a gas station parking lot. Another image showed a female ICE agent walking her dog, the time and date scrawled on the back in red ink. These weren't random snapshots. They were scouting images documenting routines and vulnerabilities. But the most shocking development came when nearby gas station security footage was reviewed. A man, limping and wearing a dark cap, had purchased bandages and water just a day after the Reyes ambush. The man matched no current suspects in the ICE database. Facial recognition software ran its analysis, and within minutes, a result returned. The man in the footage was Elias Montoya, the former customs agent who had gone missing 3 years earlier. His face had changed slightly, his beard now longer, his frame thinner, but the match was definitive. Montoya had once been a respected agent with access to classified enforcement data. Before his disappearance, he had been under internal investigation for leaking sensitive information to criminal organizations operating along the border. He vanished before any charges could be filed, and many believed he had fled south, possibly killed by the very traffickers he had aided. But now, it appeared he had resurfaced. And worse, he seemed to be deeply embedded in the violent network responsible for targeting federal agents. This revelation altered the investigation entirely. The possibility that Montoya had joined forces with Miguel Valenzuela was not only likely, it was becoming the central theory. If Montoya had shared intel and operational knowledge with Miguel, it would explain how their ambush was so precise. It also meant they had the means to plan further attacks, possibly even more devastating ones. Searches for Montoya intensified. The FBI and Homeland Security joined ICE in creating a joint task force dedicated to tracking down both fugitives. Warnings were sent to agents across the southern states. Everyone working in immigration enforcement was now a potential target. As the manhunt expanded, so did the sense of urgency. With Montoya involved, the threat was no longer confined to Texas. The reach of the plan, the coordination, and the intent suggested something larger was underway. And the fear grew that the ambush of Agent Reyes had simply been the beginning of a calculated campaign designed to strike fear deep into the heart of federal law enforcement. The break in the case came unexpectedly, triggered by a minor traffic incident in the remote town of San Ignacio. A semi-truck driver reported strange activity at an abandoned meatpacking plant on the outskirts of town. He had seen flickering lights through the broken windows late at night, and thought someone might be stripping the building for scrap. Local deputies responded the next morning, and upon discovering motion-triggered cameras mounted to the outer walls, immediately alerted federal authorities. When the joint task force arrived, it became clear this wasn't just a squat or shelter. It was an operational hub, hidden in plain sight. The building was vast and decaying, its walls rusted and thick with dust. But inside, agents uncovered a complex web of traps, decoys, and makeshift surveillance. Wire trip alarms were strewn across narrow corridors, and a converted control room had been rigged to intercept nearby law enforcement radio signals. Footage from hidden cameras was being streamed to portable screens, allowing someone inside to monitor law enforcement movement in real time. One room contained mannequins dressed in tactical gear, positioned near windows as visual misdirection. As agents moved deeper into the plant, a sudden burst of gunfire rang out from the rafters above. Tactical teams responded instantly, breaching stairwells and sweeping the upper levels. After a tense and chaotic exchange, a single suspect was found dead in a locked storage room. He had been shot in the chest during the gunfire. Fingerprints confirmed what everyone feared: it was Elias Montoya. Montoya's death closed one part of the mystery but opened another. Miguel Valenzuela was nowhere in the building. Not a single trace of him, no DNA, no personal items, no digital footprint. If they had once operated together, Miguel had moved on, or perhaps distanced himself in anticipation of a raid. Inside Montoya's backpack, agents found a weathered journal. The entries were chilling. The journal laid out a list of 5 federal agents, each marked with specific dates and times. Agent Reyes had been the first name. Second name was the female ICE officer whose photo had been found in the cemetery. The plan detailed a slow, methodical campaign. Strike hard, retreat into the shadows, wait for fear to spread. It was designed not only to kill, but to unravel the entire enforcement structure through paranoia and chaos. Pages of the journal also hinted at international support, cryptic references to suppliers, codes, and border safe houses. It was clear Montoya had not been operating on desperation alone. There was funding, planning, and outside involvement. Whether Miguel had orchestrated this from the beginning or been pulled into it by Montoya remained unclear. With the blue alert lifted following Montoya's death, public attention began to fade. But federal agencies remained on high alert. Miguel Valenzuela's name was now listed on the FBI's most wanted list. Though Montoya was dead, the fear remained. Somewhere beyond the borders of surveillance and safety, Miguel was still moving, still watching. He had disappeared once, and with every passing day, the possibility grew that he would strike again smarter, quieter, and deadlier than before.